The very first thing the audience of Star Trek ever learned about Captain Christopher Pike, other than that he was Captain Kirk's predecessor as commanding officer of the Starship Enterprise, was that he had a tragic fate. Even though an active, healthy Captain Pike, played by former big-screen Jesus Jeffrey Hunter, is the star of the original pilot episode, The Cage, that episode wasn't released in its original form until decades later. TV viewers watching the original run of Star Trek met Captain Pike in the two-part episode The Menagerie, which reused much of the footage from the pilot, couched in a frame story that established the events of The Cage as taking place 13 years in the past, and featured a present-day Pike who was living with significant disability, unable to move or communicate without the aid of a motorized wheelchair that he can use to express his wishes in the most basic manner possible, by making a beeping sound accompanied by a flashing light. 1 beep for yes, 2 beeps for no. It's a sad place for the captain of the Enterprise to end up, eh? Is it, though? The Menagerie isn't the last time we see the character of Captain Pike, and his more recent appearances, plus the ending of The Menagerie, have got me thinking, is Captain Pike's tragic fate actually a happy ending? When Star Trek reintroduced Captain Pike in the second season of Star Trek Discovery, he was a few years past the events of The Cage, but still several years away from the accident that would put him in the beep chair. Now played by Ensign Mount, during the course of Discovery's second season, Pike learns of his future. He even chooses it, taking a Klingon time crystal and locking in his destiny for the sake of accomplishing their mission. It's a whole thing. Even though Pike chooses to accept his fate, he's not thrilled about it. To be honest, knowing that the beep chair waits only a few years ahead casts a shadow over Pike's adventures in Discovery's spin-off, Star Trek Strange New Worlds. But that knowledge also lends a layer of poignancy to that series and tragic heroism to Pike that wouldn't have been present otherwise. One of the threads running through the excellent first season of Strange New Worlds is Pike grappling with his fate. When the season begins, Pike is home on Earth in Montana on extended leave from Starfleet. He's rocking a depression beard. He's hiding. Still cooking for himself, which is a good sign, I guess. Pike reluctantly returns to duty to lead a rescue mission after his first officer from the Enterprise, Number 1, is captured by some aliens, and after that point, he decides to make the most of whatever time he has left before the accident. But he hangs on to the faint possibility that maybe, somehow, he can avoid the accident and change his destiny. Pike being Pike, it's not just about him, it's about Starfleet cadets who he knows will be killed in the accident that injures him. He wants to save them. His hopes to somehow prevent the accident are dashed when he receives a visit in the final episode of Season 1 from himself. A version of Pike from an alternate future where he did manage to change his fate comes back in time to deliver a warning. Hey, don't change your fate. You get to skip the accident, but it basically ruins everything else. Just take the hit and sit in your beep chair for the rest of your life like a man. Since then, Pike has pretty much abandoned his hopes of avoiding the beep chair, and barring an incredible act of cowardice on the parts of the creators of the show, his fate is sealed. Whether or not we actually see it on screen before the end of the series, that's where Pike's journey is taking him. We're supposed to be sad about that. It's certainly understandable why Pike would be sad about it, though not sad enough to give up making his own pancakes. I love that resilience. Flip them flapjacks while you can, Chris. Flip them flapjacks while you can. But to understand why Pike's sad ending might secretly be a happy one, we need to first look not to the future, but to the past. And not Pike's past either, but Star Trek's past. All the way back to Season 1 of Star Trek the Original Series. In reality, it wasn't a massive accidental exposure to delta radiation that put Pike in the beep chair. It was economics. Ain't it always? The pilot episode of Star Trek, The Cage, was not cheap to make, and it was never broadcast during the original run of the series because NBC rejected it and ordered a second pilot, for which the show was almost entirely recast. The only regular TOS character to also appear in The Cage is Spock. To get some value out of the rejected pilot, and to make its story make sense in the context of a series that was now about a completely different group of people, The creators of Star Trek came up with a frame story involving Christopher Pike coming aboard Captain Kirk's Enterprise. Jeffrey Hunter, who played Pike in The Cage, wasn't available to reprise the role, so to disguise the fact that the Pike appearing in the frame story was played by a different actor than the Pike who appeared in the footage from The Cage that would make up the bulk of the episode, Sean Kenny, who plays Pike in the frame story, was dressed in black and placed in a chair that enclosed most of his body and was made up to look as though he had been badly burned. And just to cover all their bases, they also established that because of the accident, he could no longer speak and was only able to communicate by operating the beep chair. Ta-da! All it took to fit the pilot into an episode of the series was to contrive a grievous injury to the original protagonist. Of course he looks a little different, you guys. He's been melted by radiation. The plot of the episode where we first meet Beep Chair Pike, the menagerie, involves Spock stealing the Enterprise to take Captain Pike to the planet Talos 4, where he hopes Pike will be able to escape his disability. Pike's life in the Beep Chair is depicted as being a fate worse than death. The chair is a prison, and this once strong and vital man is reduced to an invalid. Pike, as we see him in the menagerie, is a victim in need of a rescue. This was the 1960s, and disability, particularly a state of disability as extreme as Pike's, was regularly presented in this way. Disabled people were shown in film and television to elicit our horror or our pity. Think of Joe from Johnny Got His Gun, which was published as a novel in 1938 and adapted into a film in 1971, 5 years after the menagerie originally aired. Joe's disability is even more extreme than Pike's. A soldier fighting in the First World War, Joe is struck by an artillery shell and awakens in a hospital sometime later to find that he has lost both arms, both legs, and his face, rendering him blind, deaf, and mute. His only remaining sense is that of touch, and his only method of communication is through Morse code. Joe spells out messages by banging his head against his pillow, and a doctor responds by tapping his fingers on Joe's forehead. As presented in the book and the film, but especially in the film, Joe's disability is a state of unimaginable torture. He is a prisoner within his own shattered body, and his only possible escape is death, which he longs for but is never granted. Most other depictions of severe disability aren't nearly that bleak, but the difference is a matter of degree. It's better to die than to end up like Joe or Christopher Pike. That's the message. Pike's fate needs to be grim in order to motivate Spock to do what he does in the menagerie, or at least that seems to be what Gene Roddenberry, who wrote the menagerie, thought. More recently, Discovery and Strange New Worlds have also presented Pike's accident and disability in an extremely negative light, but with a little more nuance, which goes along with the broader evolution of how disabilities are portrayed in the media that has taken place since Star Trek: The Original Series originally aired. One of the factors driving that evolution has been the increased visibility of real people with disabilities comparable to those of Captain Pike. The foremost example in my mind is Christopher Reeve, who played Superman on the big screen in the 1970s and 80s. In 1995, a horse riding accident left Reeve paralyzed from the neck down. He used a motorized wheelchair and a ventilator for the rest of his life. Though he described enduring a period of serious grief and depression following his accident, Reeve became determined to make the best of his circumstances, and through the final decade of his life, he continued to act, directed 2 films, wrote 2 books, and became a tireless advocate for stem cell research and the rights and dignity of disabled people. Reeve and other prominent figures, astrophysicist Stephen Hawking, who produced groundbreaking theoretical work in the decades following the onset of his disability, journalist Jean-Dominique Bauby, who wrote his memoir, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, while living with locked-in syndrome, Ed Roberts, who was left paralyzed by polio and became a leading activist for the rights of disabled people, helped to educate the public that people with disabilities, which prevented them from moving, communicating, or even breathing without assistance, could still live active and fulfilling lives. With that increased awareness, the creators of the more recent Star Trek shows to feature the character have reframed and somewhat reimagined Captain Pike's beep chair situation and the road he travels leading up to that point. The menagerie emphasizes that Beep Chair Pike is an object of pity, a helpless victim who needs his old pal Spock to come to his aid. As the events of The Cage are played on a view screen for the characters in the frame story, there are shots of Pike longingly watching his younger, able-bodied self. The newer depictions of Pike downplay the victim angle by giving Pike more agency prior to the accident that disables him. In Season 2 of Discovery, Pike doesn't just learn his future, he actively accepts it to serve the greater good. When he touches the time crystal and has the vision of himself in the beep chair, his initial reaction is shock and horror. He pulls back from the crystal, deeply shaken. The Klingon monk acting as Pike's guide offers him a choice. He can leave the crystal in its place and avoid the fate he saw in the vision, but he will leave empty-handed. There is no other time crystal that Pike can have, only this one that is meant for him. Discovery's mission is of the utmost importance. The existence of all sentient life in the galaxy is at stake. Yeah, the creators of Discovery did that a lot. And for that mission to succeed, they need a time crystal. So Pike makes the selfless choice, the heroic choice. He takes the time crystal and seals his fate. Discovery's mission is a success. The galaxy is saved. But Pike's future in the beep chair is now unavoidable. The accident that disables him, previously presented as a random event, becomes instead the result of an active, informed decision. The beep chair is still undesirable, still tragic, and still presented as horrifying. Pike's vision from the time crystal is shot like a scene from a horror movie, and in the first episode of Strange New Worlds, he is haunted by the image of his own scarred and screaming face. But Pike is no longer completely without agency. It's not a meaningless event or a cruel cosmic punishment, but the price that Pike has to pay in order to do what must be done for the greater good. Giving Pike foreknowledge of the accident and the beep chair enables the creators of Strange New Worlds to do something else interesting. The emotional weight that Pike carries as a result of learning his future and choosing to accept it becomes one of the character's defining traits. Coming to terms with the future that awaits him and figuring out what to do with the time he has left until then is a major part of his life. It doesn't come into play in every episode. It's actually of central importance to only a handful of episodes, and there are many episodes where it isn't mentioned at all, but it's a shadow that Pike lives under, and it's impossible to understand his character without acknowledging it. The presence of that shadow transforms Pike's story in the series into a metaphor for living with a disability like the one that awaits him, or with a terminal diagnosis, or a degenerative condition. Remember what I said a few minutes ago about Christopher Reeve after his writing accident? How he said he went through a grieving process and a period of depression. That's where we find Pike at the start of Strange New Worlds. The extended leave of absence from the Enterprise, the refusal to answer calls from his superior officer, Admiral April, the beard. He's wallowing. He's in denial. He's trying not to think about it. These are ways of coping with grief, with pain. But pretty soon, Pike pulls himself together and decides to just get on with it. Yes, he is destined to be grievously injured, to lose his mobility and his voice. But that day has not yet come. His future is still ahead of him. He wants to spend his remaining days of health and independence, however many or few they may be, doing what he loves, being the captain of the Enterprise. People in real life faced with difficult health challenges have to deal with the same feelings and make the same choices. Whether the challenge is a shortened lifespan or an unavoidable decline in health or having to adjust to life with significant disabilities, it all ultimately comes down to one decision. Do you try and make the best life you can under the circumstances? Or do you not? Reading Pike's final years leading up to the accident as a metaphor for living with a significant disability, degenerative condition, or terminal disease doesn't make him winding up in the beep chair any happier of an ending, literally speaking, I suppose, but telling the story the way the creators of Discovery and Strange New Worlds have told it so far does serve to remind us that life can still go on. and can still be meaningful and joyous, even in such difficult conditions. Speaking of life going on, there's a very important point that I've avoided directly addressing until now. Pike's story does not end with him sitting in the beep chair. In the frame story of the Menagerie, Spock steals the Enterprise to take Captain Pike to Talos 4 because the people who live there, the Talosians, have incredibly advanced mental abilities that allow them to create illusions in the minds of others. Illusions so real they can't be discerned from reality. Captain Pike encountered the Talosians while he was captain of the Enterprise during the events of The Cage, and now, a dozen or so years later, Showtime, the Talosians have agreed to allow Pike to live on their planet, where they will use their powers of illusion to enable him to experience a life free of the beep chair. The final image we see of Pike is him, seemingly restored to his younger, healthier self, being led into the Talosians' subterranean habitat by Vina, the human woman who also lives here among the Talosians, and who fell in love with him when they met the last time Pike visited the planet. Happy ending? It certainly seems like we're supposed to take it that way, though once again, the creators of Strange New Worlds have introduced another layer that makes Pike's illusion-assisted residence on Talos 4 a bit more complicated. At the end of its uneven and mostly disappointing third season, Strange New Worlds presented one of its best sequences. Not a full episode, but a segment of an episode that was as good as anything the show has ever done. Here's the situation. Episode 10 of Season 3, titled New Life and New Civilizations. The crew of the Enterprise is facing the threat of the Vesda, an ancient, evil, and powerful race who have been imprisoned for, millennia? A long time, and are about to be set free. The galaxy's only hope is Captain Pike's girlfriend, Captain Marie Battelle, who earlier in the season survived an encounter with the Gorn by having Gorn DNA fused with her own human DNA, which, as it turns out, makes her uniquely suited to defeat the Vesda because the Gorn and the Vesda are ancient enemies and yada yada yada. It's a whole thing that doesn't really matter right now, because here's the important part. To defeat the Vesda, Battelle will need to transform into a kind of eternal guard, a statue that will hold the Vesda in their prison forever. That means the life she and Pike were hoping to have together isn't going to happen. Pike accompanies Battelle to face down the Vesda, but then they find themselves somehow living that life together that they weren't supposed to have. They get married, move into a house on Earth, raise a family. When the time comes for Pike to have his accident, a day they've both been dreading, inexplicably, miraculously, it doesn't happen. Pike returns home uninjured, and his life with Battelle continues. The dark cloud that has loomed over him for years, finally having vanished. They grow old together. After a long, happy life, Battelle lies on her deathbed with Pike by her side, and in her last moments, she reveals to him that all this has only been an illusion. A gift, she calls it, a life that was everything she could ever have hoped for. That life, that dream of a life, has given her the strength to do what she must to defeat the Vesda. And then that's what she does, trapping the evil Vesda in their prison for all eternity and transforming into the Beholder, the statue that will stand guard over the Vesda. And it plays kind of like a discount MCU climax. And I'm not really crazy about it, but that segment of Pike and Battelle's life together that leads into it is just unbelievably well done. It works on its own terms as a deeply affecting piece of drama, and it reframes Pike's beep chair fate in a way that makes that fate simultaneously less tragic and more tragic than ever before. Pike winding up in the beep chair is sad not only for the physical and emotional suffering he experiences as a result of the accident, but also because it means he doesn't get to live out the rest of the life he would have had. Through the vision of his marriage and family with Battelle, he does get to live that life. The life he wants, the life he fears losing. But then, when it's over, he finds himself right back where he was when it began. He has the memories. It was real to him. As a reprieve from his destiny, however, it was only temporary. The accident and the beep chair are still ahead of him. The story of Pike and Battelle places the ending of the menagerie in a new context as well. It seems clear from that episode, and from If Memory Serves, the episode of Season 2 of Discovery where Pike returns for the first time to Talos 4, that Pike and Vina, the woman who lives there among the Talosians, have genuine feelings for one another. But Strange New Worlds shows us that, unlike Pike and Vina, Pike and Battelle have a long-term relationship. They're in love and committed to each other. When Pike imagines a happy future for himself, he imagines it with Battelle, not with Vina. Viewed in context with the events of Strange New Worlds, Pike arriving at Talos 4 at the end of the menagerie is not just the survivor of a brutal, disabling accident. He's also a widower. It doesn't make him going off with Vina into a sad ending, but it does leave it feeling like far less of a fairy tale conclusion than it did before the creators of Strange New Worlds did their work. Gets him out of the beep chair, though, doesn't it? Actually, before I conclude, let's talk about the beep chair. That's another angle of this worth examining. Is the beep chair really that bad? I'm not saying it's good. Obviously, most people, if given the option to choose from all possible circumstances, would not choose the beep chair. At the beginning of the menagerie, Commodore Mendez, the officer in charge of the starbase where Pike is living, describes his condition and makes it sound pretty dire. Unable to move, unable to communicate except through flashing and beeping, fully dependent on machines to stay alive, a battery-driven heart. We're spared the details of the bathroom situation, but I'm guessing there are tubes involved. Although, this is Star Trek, maybe they just use the transporter, beam it out of his GI tract and straight into the reservoir for the replicator. Yesterday's chicken sandwich is today's bowel movement is tomorrow's chicken sandwich. Ingenious on a scientific and gastronomic level, but not an ideal lifestyle from the perspective of the person in the chair. And yet, what is the beep chair? In our real-life, present-day vocabulary, I think we'd call it a piece of assistive technology. It's a communications aid. It's a mobility aid. It looks restrictive, a black shell that wraps around Pike's entire body, leaving only his shoulders and head exposed. But the beep chair isn't actually Pike's problem. He's not trapped in the chair. Like Joe from Johnny Got His Gun, Pike is trapped in his own injured body. The chair enables him to move and to communicate. The movement and communication it provides is very limited, but it's better than what Pike would be able to do without the chair's assistance. It all depends on how you look at it. The beep chair could be a symbol of Pike's disability and isolation, or it could be the tool which his still active and healthy mind uses to continue engaging with the world in the best way available to him. And sure, the limitations of the beep chair are pretty glaring, especially by the standards of Star Trek technology. In the menagerie, Commodore Mendez tells Kirk that Pike's beep chair is programmed to respond to his brain waves. That's how Pike is able to operate the chair, with his thoughts. So the beep chair responds to his thoughts, but he can only communicate through one beep for yes, two beeps for no. Must have been those delta rays Pike was exposed to in the accident, huh? I bet that's it. How are you going to program a mind-controlled life support chair to do more than beep once or twice for someone who got a face full of delta rays? It's just so ridiculous. I don't think this was intentional on the part of Gene Roddenberry when he wrote The Menagerie. Representation for people with disabilities does not seem to have been foremost on his mind with this episode. However, it's possible to interpret the beep chair's limitations as a commentary on the way people with disabilities are not disadvantaged by their conditions, but by how society fails to adequately accommodate their special needs. This concept, called the social model of disability, didn't didn't really exist in 1966 when the Menagerie was written, but it is a useful lens through which to view Captain Pike's situation when we're talking about how truly tragic his fate is or isn't. If we interpret Pike's move to Talos 4 at the end of the Menagerie using the social model, it enables us to better explain why Pike's fate is ultimately a happy one rather than a tragic one. And it also resolves one of the sharpest criticisms of Pike's characterization from a disability advocacy perspective. At the end of the Menagerie, we see Captain Pike, restored to health, heading off to his life with Vina. But this is only an illusion, created by the mental powers of the Talosians. In reality, Pike is still in the beep chair, and presumably will be for the rest of his life. By denying this reality, so this particular criticism says, the episode sends the message that people with serious disabilities comparable to Pike's would be better off living in a fantasy world, and, perhaps even worse, that a true happy ending, which also acknowledges the reality of the disability, is impossible, that escapism is the only way to avoid ending a disabled person's story on a depressing note. Here's the thing. I think this is a reasonable criticism. But if you read the ending of the Menagerie in the light of the social model of disability, it's possible to view the illusion of health and mobility the Talosians give to Pike as merely another kind of accommodation. Pike is still a disabled person, but thanks to the Talosian illusion, he no longer experiences the disadvantages associated with his disability, limitations that would significantly affect his quality of life in the society of the Federation have no impact on Talos 4. Looked at from this angle, the Talosians are providing Pike with a more effective beep chair. Their telepathic powers are the ultimate assistive technology. Is Captain Pike's tragic fate actually a happy ending? It's a matter of perspective, like everything else. I think the answer to the question is yes. When you look at the history of Captain Pike, from his original appearances in The Cage and the Menagerie, on through Star Trek Discovery and Strange New Worlds, we see an evolution from a one-dimensional figure of pity created to provide an excuse to reuse footage from an unaired pilot episode, to a hero of true depth who embodies not only injury and tragedy, but also nobility and resilience. He perseveres through fear and loss and eventually arrives at a place where his disabilities are accommodated and he's able to live a life free from pain. But it's also important to remember that, from Pike's perspective, his arrival on Talos 4 in the Menagerie is not an ending, but a continuation. We don't witness Pike's funeral, but rather his retirement. As a child of the West himself, Pike knows that cowboys don't die, they ride off into the sunset. Yet, that too is an illusion, a fantasy, an accommodation that helps us cope with that terminal diagnosis we all receive at birth. In a sense, we're all like Captain Pike in Strange New Worlds, knowing our days are numbered, hoping the number is higher than we think it is, trying to enjoy the good times while they last. Our real stories are each unique, but be they long or short, happy or tragic, they all end the same way. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to let you know what the subject of the next Trek Actually video is going to be, but before I do that, I want to give shoutouts to some of my newest Patreon patrons and channel members. First, the new patrons. They are Summer, thanks Summer. Bo Ray Joe, thanks Bo Ray. Jordan Brady, thanks Jordan. Eben, thanks Eben. And now, the new channel members. They are Blue Elf, thanks Blue Elf. Cyber Bullard, thanks Cyber Bullard. Zulu Romeo, thanks Zulu Romeo. Invalid User 6431, thanks Invalid User 6431. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives or clicking the join button to become a member of this channel. All patrons and members get access to exclusive posts that allow you to vote in the polls that determine upcoming Trek Actually topics, and also submit questions ahead of time for my twice monthly Ask Away live streams. If you pledge $5 a month or more on Patreon, or become a member at the $5 a month tier or higher, you get a shout out at the end of a Trek Actually video. If you'd rather give a one-time gift than a recurring monthly contribution, you're always more than welcome to do that by clicking the thanks button right below the video, or via PayPal or Venmo. The links for those are in the video description. Many thanks. If you like what I do on YouTube, especially the Star Trek related stuff, you should also check out my side projects, The Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that I'm on alongside Jason Harding and Amanda Billings, and Trek Reluctantly, the watch-along stream Dana Cole and I do every Wednesday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern on this channel right here. As always, links in the description. Now, for next month's regulation Trek Actually topic. We all know that an essential part of what Star Trek does is comment on social and political issues in the real world. Well, most of us know that. Some of us still haven't caught on even after 60 years. But what happened to Star Trek when one of the real-world circumstances that it commented on the most actually changed? I'll explore that in next month's video as I try to answer the question, did the end of the Cold War actually hurt Star Trek? That's next month. I'll be back then and a bunch of times before then. So until the next time you see me, whenever that is, thanks for watching and take care, everybody.